The graveyard lay crooked on the edge of the desert, fenced with rotting wood and memories no one bothered to straighten. Lara dismounted slowly, boots sinking into dust that had swallowed more names than it ever remembered. The sun was high, cruel and bright, as if it had no respect for grief. She pulled her hat lower, dark hair pinned tight at her neck, and scanned the uneven rows. Some graves bore leaning crosses with half-faded names. Others were nothing more than stones, stacked by tired hands. And too many, far too many, were unmarked. Her brother was in one of those. Elias Moreno, Outlaw's son, fool dead, at 27, with a bullet through his back and no marker to say he'd ever breathed. Lara clenched her jaw and stepped forward, counting rows like a prayer. She had followed rumors across 3 territories, whispers of a botched robbery, a posse bought with silver, a man left behind. Every trail led here. She knelt, brushing dust from a pile of stones that might have been placed with care once. "I found you," she murmured, though she didn't know if it was true. A sound behind. Hurlither, creaking a horse snorting low. Lara's hand went to the revolver at her hip before she stood. The man sat astride, a gray horse, just beyond the fence, watching her like he'd been there longer than the shadows. He was tall, dark-haired, with a scar pulling one side of his mouth into something that wasn't quite a smile. His coat was worn but clean, his posture easy in the saddle, too easy. "He shouldn't be here," he said. "That's none of your concern," Lara replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. His eyes flicked to the stones at her feet. Something passed through his expression, recognition, maybe, or guilt. "It is," he said quietly. "This ground has a way of calling trouble." She studied him more carefully now. The way his hand rested near his gun, not threatening, just ready. The way his eyes kept returning to the graveyard, like it held a ledger he couldn't close. "You know who's buried here?" she asked. "Most of them," he said. Her chest tightened. "Then you know my brother." The word brother landed between them like a dropped coin. The man exhaled slowly and swung down from his horse. "What was his name?" "You already know," she said. Antonio Reyes hesitated, just long enough to damn himself. Lara's gun was up in a breath, barrel aimed at his heart. "You rode with him," she said, voice steady, despite the heat roaring in her ears. "You were there the night he died." Antonio lifted his hands, palms open. "Yes, and you left him." A shadow crossed his face. "I didn't pull the trigger, but you led them to him," she said, each word sharpened by weeks of riding and rage. Silence stretched. A hawk cried overhead. "I made a choice," Antonio said at last. "One I've paid for every day since." Lara's finger tightened on the trigger. This was the man she'd chased across half the West. A traitor. The last one to see her brother alive. "Show me where he's buried," she said. "Or I swear I'll put you in the ground beside him." Antonio met her stare, something raw and honest in his eyes. "I will," he said. "But once I do, you'll have to hear the whole truth." The wind swept through the graveyard, stirring dust where names should be. Lara lowered the gun just enough. "Start walking," she said. Antonio led her past the fence and deeper into the graveyard, his boots stirring dust that clung like regret. Lara followed a few paces behind, gun still in her hand. She didn't trust herself to holster it. Not yet. They stopped near the far edge, where the land dipped and the markers thinned, until there were only stones and silence. "Here," Antonio said. Lara's breath caught. The grave was smaller than she imagined, the stones arranged carefully, deliberately. Someone had taken time. That hurt almost as much as neglect would have. She knelt, fingers trembling as she touched the top stone. It was smooth, worn by wind and years. "You did this," she said. "Yes. You gave him more care in death than you did in life," she snapped. Antonio didn't argue. He crouched nearby, resting his forearms on his knees. "I couldn't save him," he said, "but I could make sure he wasn't left like an animal." Lara laughed bitterly. "How noble of you." She stood abruptly, turning the gun back on him. "Start talking, from the beginning." and don't lie, I'll know. Antonio nodded once. Elias wasn't meant for the outlaw life, he said. He talked about you, about leaving. He wanted one last score so he could start fresh. Lara swallowed. That sounded like her brother. Always chasing one final answer. The job was supposed to be clean, Antonio continued. Rob a payroll wagon outside Red Hollow. No killing. Just fast and quiet. And Lara demanded, and the law was waiting. Her jaw tightened. Because of you. Yes, the word fell heavy. They had my father, Antonio said. Sheriff made it plain. Give up the crew or watch him hang by sunrise. Lara's grip wavered for half a second. You could have warned them. I tried, he said quickly. I told Elias not to ride that night. I told him it was wrong. He laughed, said, fear didn't suit me. Lara looked away, tears burning. She could hear Elias laughing, see his crooked grin. The posse came in fast. Antonio went on. Shots everywhere. Horses screaming. Elias took off toward the river like we planned. But you didn't follow. I did at first. His voice cracked. Then I saw the sheriff. He nodded at me. I froze. And my brother paid for it, she said. Antonio bowed his head. I rode away, I thought. I thought maybe Elias would escape. He always did. Lara stepped forward and struck him across the face with the barrel of her gun. The sound echoed sharp and final. He didn't fall, didn't raise his hands. Just accepted it. You left him to die, she said, shaking. Do you know what it was like burying Mama without him there? Knowing he died alone because you chose yourself? Antonio looked up at her, blood at the corner of his mouth. Every night, he said, I see him running. I hear the shot. I wake up wishing it had been me. The words didn't heal anything, but they cut deeper than excuses would have. Lara turned back to the grave, anger folding into grief. I came here to kill you, she admitted. That's all that kept me riding, I know. But now, she exhaled slowly. Now I don't know what I want. Antonio stood, careful not to crowd her. Let me help you, he said. Mark the grave. Tell his story. Do something better with what's left. She looked at him, sharply. Why? Because redemption doesn't erase sin, he replied. But it asks you to carry it forward. The wind shifted, warm and restless. Lara knelt once more by her brother's grave, the gun finally lowering to her side. Help me, she said quietly. But understand this one wrong step, and I won't hesitate. Antonio nodded. Fair. As they stood together among the unmarked dead, Lara realized something unsettling. The man she hated most might be the only one who truly understood what she'd lost. They left the graveyard at dawn. Lara hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elias running dust, flying breath ragged, fate closing in. Antonio had kept watch by the fire, silent and still, like a man who didn't believe he deserved rest. Their destination lay 2 days north, where a carpenter named Mateo was rumored to carve markers for those who couldn't afford memory. Lara wanted a name in wood, a date, proof that Elias had mattered. The trail was narrow and unforgiving. They rode in uneasy silence, the past riding between them like a third shadow. By midday, Antonio finally spoke. Elias saved my life once. Lara stiffened. When San Miguel Pass, he said. Ambush. I went down with a bullet in my leg. He dragged me half a mile under fire. Her throat tightened, despite her will. He never told me. He didn't brag, Antonio said. Just laughed and said I owed him a drink. They stopped near a dry creek to water the horses. Lara dismounted and crouched, splashing water on her face. She studied her reflection, dust-streaked eyes, hardened by miles and mourning. Why stay with me? She asked suddenly. You could ride off. No one would stop you. Antonio leaned against a rock, gaze distant. Running hasn't helped so far. Before she could answer, a rifle cracked. The shot shattered the quiet. Dirt exploded near Antonio's boots. Down, Lara shouted. drawing her revolver as she rolled behind the creek bank. Two riders burst from the brush-pussy men, by the look of them. One wore a sheriff's badge, dulled by age. "Well, I'll be damned," the older man said. "Antonio Reyes. Thought you'd learned to keep your head low." Antonio rose slowly, hands raised. "I'm not riding with outlaws anymore, Sheriff Cole." Cole laughed. "Funny thing is, that don't matter much." Lara fired first, her shot clipping a rider's shoulder. The creek erupted with gunfire. Horses screamed. Smoke burned her lungs. Antonio dove for cover, grabbing a fallen rifle. He moved with practiced speed, covering Lara's flank. "Since when do you protect me?" she shouted. "Since I already failed once." They fought hard and fast. One rider fled wounded. The sheriff fell into the creek, blood staining the dust red. Silence returned, heavier than before. Lara lowered her gun, heart pounding. Antonio stood there breathing hard, eyes fixed on the body. "P would have hunted me forever," Antonio said quietly. Lara watched him, really watched him, for the first time. Not the traitor, not the shadow of her brother's death. Just a man carrying too many ghosts. They buried the sheriff, shallow, and moved on. That night, the fire burned low. Lara handed Antonio a flask without looking at him. "For Elias," she said. Antonio nodded and drank. For Elias, the distance between them felt smaller, still sharp, still dangerous, but no longer empty. They reached the carpenter's town just before dusk, a place barely clinging to the map. A single street, a saloon with warped doors, a workshop that smelled of pine sap and old prayers. Mateo was younger than Lara expected, his hands scarred and steady, his eyes kind in a way that felt dangerous. He listened without interruption as Lara spoke Ilias's name aloud for the first time in years. "Moreno," Mateo repeated softly. "I'll carve it clean." While the marker was being made, Lara wandered the town's edge. Antonio kept his distance, giving her space the way one gives a loaded gun, carefully. She stopped near a line of finished markers, leaning against a fence. So many names, so many endings. She realized then how close Elias had come to being nothing at all. Antonio joined her, hands folded behind his back. "He talked about you the night before, Red Hollow," he said. Lara didn't look at him. "What did he say?" "That you were stubborn." Antonio smiled faintly. "That if you ever came looking, God help whoever stood in your way." She snorted despite herself. "Sounds like him." They stood in silence until Mateo returned with the marker wrapped in cloth. Lara's breath hitched as he uncovered it. Elias Moreno, beloved son and brother, gone, but not forgotten. Her knees nearly gave out. Antonio reached for her instinctively, then stopped, unsure. Lara surprised them both by leaning into him, just for a moment. His hand rested lightly at her shoulder, steady and warm. "Thank you," she whispered to Mateo, to fate, maybe even to Antonio. The ride back to the graveyard felt different, quieter, like the land itself was listening. They placed the marker at sunrise. Lara packed the earth firm, her hands sure now. When she stepped back, Elias finally had a name the world could see. Antonio removed his hat. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not just for that night, for all of it." Lara studied him for a long time. The anger was still there. It always would be. But something else had grown beside its understanding, unwanted, but real. "I don't forgive you," she said. "But I won't kill you either." Antonio nodded. "That's more than I deserve." They stood together as the sun climbed, light spilling over the marker. "So what now?" he asked. Lara mounted her horse. "Now I ride south. Start living again. And me." She paused. "That's up to you." Antonio swung into his saddle, a small smile tugging at his scarred mouth. "Then, maybe I'll ride north. Do some good, where I can." They shared a final looks. Something unfinished, something honest. As Lara turned her horse away, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not healed, but moving forward, behind her. Antonio watched until she disappeared into the dust, then tipped his hat toward the grave. "Goodbye, old friend," he murmured. The wind passed through the graveyard, brushing over a name that would no longer be forgotten. Lara rode south, with the sun at her back and a quiet weight in her chest. The road stretched wide and open, but grief didn't vanish just because the horizon did. It settled differently now, no longer sharp enough to stop her breathing, but deep enough to remind her she was still alive. She camped that night, near a stand of cottonwoods. As the fire crackled, she found herself thinking of Antonio, of the way he had stood at Ilias's grave, hat in hand like a man finally done running. At dawn, hoofbeats pulled her from sleep. Her hand went to her revolver before she recognized him. Antonio reined in a few paces away, expression uncertain. "I said I'd ride north," he said. "I lied." Lara arched a brow. "You always this bad at leaving?" "Only when it matters." He dismounted slowly, respectful of the distance between them. "I realized something after you left. I've spent years trying to make up for one wrong choice by making none at all. Turns out that's its own kind of cowardice." She studied him, searching for deceit and finding none. "So what do you want?" "To help build something, instead of burying it," he said. "If you'll have me riding alongside you, no debts, no lies." The fire popped, sending sparks into the morning air. Lara thought of Elias, how he'd trusted too easily, loved too hard. She wouldn't repeat his mistakes, but she wouldn't live closed off either. "You ride with me," she said at last. "You ride straight." Antonio smiled, relief softening his features. "I wouldn't know how to do anything else." They rode together, then, not as fugitives or avengers, but as two souls scarred by the same night. Towns came and went. Lara found work where she could. Antonio fixed fences, guarded caravans, kept his word. Weeks later, they returned once more to the graveyard. The marker stood firm, casting a long shadow across the dust. Lara placed fresh flowers at its base. Antonio stood beside her, silent. "He'd like this," Lara said. "Us trying." Antonio nodded. He believed people were more than their worst moments. Lara smiled faintly. Smart man. They mounted up, the past no longer chasing their heels. Some graves stayed unmarked forever. Some betrayals never fully healed. But under the wide western sky, Lara and Antonio carried forward what remained memory, truth, and the fragile hope of redemption. And somewhere between the dust and the distance, an outlaw's name finally rested in peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.